Hello everyone, this is Harsh Pallava, and in today's video we are going to discuss what is the federal funds rate and how the Federal Reserve goes on to influence this particular rate. Now in this article we can see that Fed raises the interest rates half a point to highest level in 15 years. The Federal Open Market Committee voted to boost the overnight borrowing rate half a percentage point, taking it to a targeted range between 4.25% and 4.5%. Now first let's understand what the word federal funds rate means. Now, federal funds rate is the rate at which large international banks borrow and lend to each other. Now, let's be really careful about this point that it is not the Federal Reserve that sets the federal funds rate. Okay, what the Federal Reserve can do is form a target as to in what range shall the federal funds rate lie between. Okay, so here it has formed a range of 4.25% and 4.5%. Now this depends on the economic situation of the country. If inflation is high, the range may also be higher. Okay, now if inflation and if let's say we are in a recession and there's a need to lower interest rates, this range will be lower. So right now the range is between 4.25% to 4.5%. Now remember that the actual rate can vary because this rate will depend on the borrowing and lending between these international banks. Now the Federal Reserve has to ensure that whatever borrowing and lending is happening between these international banks, that should happen within this particular range, 4.25% and 4.5%. So let's go on to this whiteboard. So what is the federal funds rate? As I told you, it is the rate at which bank 1 will lend to bank 2 and vice versa. Now the Federal Reserve, it wants to influence this rate. How can it do it? Now we are going to talk about those tools with which the Federal Reserve will help ensure that the rates stay between this particular range. First one is the discount rate. Okay, so what is this discount rate? Now whenever some bank is in need of liquidity, so it goes ahead and it asks the Fed that Fed, please lend me some money, I'm in need of funds. Okay, so the Fed will lend this bank at the rate of 4.25%. That is what essentially the discount rate means. It is the rate at which the Fed will lend to banks. Okay, so what is the overnight reverse repurchase rate? Now in technical language, basically what the Fed is doing here, the Federal Reserve is selling securities, okay, to the banks with the promise of buying the securities at a higher price. Okay, the differential between the two prices is the interest rate, which is 4%. Now in simple language we can summarize this as the rate at which the Fed borrows from the banks, and this is the rate at which the Fed lends to the banks. Now imagine yourself to be a bank. Okay, let's say you are bank 2. Okay, you are B2. Now you go to the Fed and the Fed says that I will lend you at 4.25%, and now you go to bank 1 and the bank 1 says that I will lend you at 5%. Now answer this question: whom will you go ahead and borrow the money from? Obviously you'll borrow the money from the Federal Reserve, right? Why will you borrow at a higher interest rate? When the Federal Reserve is offering you 4.25%, why will you borrow at 5%? So essentially what this B1 will have to do to convince B2 to borrow from him is to basically offer a rate lower than 4.25%. Otherwise why will B2 go ahead and borrow from B1, right? So that is how the Federal Reserve is setting the upper limit, okay, with the help of the discount rate. Now let's come to the lower limit, which is the overnight reverse repurchase rate, or in simple languages, the rate at which the Fed borrows from the banks. Now let's imagine again that you are B2. Now you go to the Fed, you say that Fed, I have a lot of money and I want to lend it to you. So what rate will you give me? So the Fed is saying that I will give you it at 4%. Okay. Now you go to B1 next. Now what B1 is saying you that I will give you 3%. Now again, whom will you go and lend your money to? You will obviously again you'll go to the Fed, right? Because the Fed is offering you 4%. So why will you lend your money at 3%? So what B1 will have to do is offer you more than 4% so as to convince you to lend the money to B1. So this is how the Fed is setting the lower limit. So I hope this is clearly understandable. It's very simple, right? How it sets the lower and upper limit. Now there is one more rate which comes in between. Okay, so this rate is called interest on reserve balances. Okay, so let's really understand what's happening here. So this rate is basically a little higher than this overnight reverse repurchase rate. Now a lot of banks have excess cash with them. Okay, so what they do is they go ahead and keep this cash with the Federal Reserve to earn interest. Now let's understand this, that not every bank is eligible to keep their excess cash with the Federal Reserve. So what some banks do, what they do is the banks, let's say this bank is not eligible, okay, not eligible. Okay, the EL means eligible. So this bank is not eligible to keep its excess cash with the Federal Reserve. So what this bank will essentially do is it will instead lend it to B1. Okay, it will lend its excess cash to B1, and obviously what will this particular rate has to be lower than the interest on reserve balances rate. So what B1 is essentially doing is, because B1 is eligible, okay, B1 is eligible. So B1 is eligible to keep its excess cash balances with the Federal Reserve. What B1 will do is borrow from B2, okay, who is not eligible to keep excess cash balances with the Federal Reserve. It will borrow from B2 at a lower rate than this IORB, and it will go ahead and take that borrowed money and keep it with the Fed at the IORB. Okay, so it earns the differential, right? Because it is borrowing at B2. Let's understand it with the help of some figures. Okay, so let's say interest on reserve balances is 4.1. Okay, and what B2 is doing is B2 is basically lending to B1 at 4.05. Okay, because B2 is not eligible to keep its money directly with the Federal Reserve, it is lending to B1. Okay, so what B1 is doing is it is borrowing from B2 at 4.05%. Okay, and then it goes ahead and keeps that borrowed money with the Fed at 4.1%. So it is earning the difference in between. Okay, so this is essentially the whole story as to how the federal funds maintains, a balance, and how it actually controls the rates that big international banks charge from each other. So I hope that you enjoyed the video, and if you enjoyed it, please do like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. Also, if you have any doubts, please feel free to post it in the comment section. Okay, see you next time. Bye bye.